Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our panel discussion titled Returning to a New Workplace. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you're joining us and you've seen some of our previous webinars, welcome back. As COVID restrictions begin to lift and companies explore returning to the office, it seems timely for us to consider the future workplace and what the future workplace will look like. How will the social, societal, and cultural and technological shifts driven by COVID redefine workplace experience and frame new opportunities? I myself have been lucky and privileged enough to work from home. I'm actually joining you from my living room today. And this has made me realize, I guess, one of two things. One, I miss interacting with my coworkers in the physical office, but I definitely don't miss my morning commute. I think it's safe to say that the past 3 months has dramatically changed our relationship to work and the office. How does design adapt to meet these changing relationships between us and the workplace? As designers and strategists, we hope that today's discussion will clarify the ways in which the office can support employee well-being, resilience, and performance, providing value through smart and meaningful office design. In the first 45 minutes today, we will address the post-COVID workplace, considering both short-term solutions and long-term considerations, while the last 50 minutes will be reserved for audience questions. If you do have any questions, please submit them using the SurveyMonkey link provided here. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Donna at donna@entro.com. All right, so I think at this point, I would like to introduce our wonderful group of panelists. First, Melissa Marsh is the founder and executive director at Plastarc and senior managing director of occupant experience at Savills. Melissa's work leverages the tools of social science and business strategy to help organizations make more data-driven and people-centric real estate decisions. Melissa combines quantitative and qualitative science research with architectural expertise and is dedicated to shifting the metrics associated with the workplace from square feet and inches to occupant satisfaction and performance. I really like that statement, Melissa. The holistic approach enables Plastarc, a social research, workplace innovation, and real estate strategy firm, to recommend evidence-based interventions that make the built environment more people-centric and responsive, promoting both individual wellness and business success. Hi, Melissa. Nice to see you.
Pleasure to be here.
Bob Fox is the founder and publisher at Work Design Magazine, chairman and principal at Fox Architects. Bob oversees the Fox Architects Advisory Board, focusing on building the firm to design more complex, integrated projects, while also helping to increase value for clients. Bob is a leader in the architecture and interior design industry, and is well respected for his open-minded and innovative approach to workplace design. In 2010, Bob launched Work Design Magazine, a digital publishing company dedicated to exploring the issues, innovations, and ideas that shape the places we work. Bob possesses more than 30 years of experience and is an active member of the design community and speaks regularly at industry events focused on the future of the workplace. Hey, Bob, thanks for joining us.
Vedran, it's good to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Wonderful, me too.
And happy 10-year anniversary of Work Design. I didn't realize. Congrats.
And thanks for all your contributions.
Very exciting. Christina Kelly is an associate at Entro, whose extensive experience in place branding and professional accreditation with the WELL building standard provides a unique perspective and unique understanding of how workplace design contributes to overall team culture and performance. She brings this passion experience to her work with organizations and businesses in the areas of athletics, recreation, information technology, social services, housing, packaging, healthcare, architecture, and education. As a strategist, Christina provides direction for a number of clients, as well as overseeing all brand initiatives at Entro. Hey, Christina.
Hey. Nice to see you.
You as well. And finally, Nabil Sabet is a group director at M. Moser Associates. Nabil has worked with clients and industries around the world on millions of square feet of projects from Shanghai to San Francisco. His focus is centered on the rapid change in how people work and the opportunity this presents to raise workplace performance to a new level through environments that connect the physical space with social interactions and digital integration. As group director at M. Moser North America, Nabil brings his dynamic and entrepreneurial leadership to multidisciplinary teams and designers, strategists, and construction professionals as they evolve and implement ideas that impact the nature of people and work. Nabil, how you doing?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. All right, now that we've got the introductions out of the way, let's kick off this discussion. So to start us off, I would like each of our panelists to set the table for the next 45 minutes. But very, very briefly telling us about the one specific change to how we work and our relationship to the workplace that they see coming as a result of COVID. So generally, what are the big picture changes we see coming? And I'm just hoping, Christina, you could lead us off here.
Sure. So at Entro, our work really revolves around how people move through, understand, and experience the space that they're in. So for the change in work, we're really looking at the changes that may come both in the short and long term related to functionality and flexibility of space. So how we use those office spaces might be a lot more personable, more individualized in the needs of employees and the specific type of work at the company. And really what this pandemic is doing, I think it's speeding up something that's been happening for a while. Obviously company specific, but we've seen it a lot in tech companies over the years. Knowing that people may choose to work from home, at least for a portion of time. Spaces that might usually be taken up by desks and things like that might become areas for leisure or collaboration or other needs. So we really need the workspace to fit to that and use it best. And also that workspaces might need to appeal to employees more to draw them in where needed. So there just might need to be more thought to put in that visceral experience of place.
Nabil, would you like to continue with this question? What are the changes you see coming from your perspective?
Well, I think, generally we're seeing a massive upskilling across every industry as people have worked from home for several weeks now, almost, 3 full months. These are skill sets that we think are here to last. And many organizations have gone through a digital transformation that would have taken a very long time. And it's almost been a forcing function to be working from home. And so we think that has massive implications. That's one of the skills that we've created during this period, is to perform parts of our work remotely, and therefore, expanding that as another potential work environment. And I think moving forward, this is going to have profound impact on the return to the office. It's going to have profound impact on how offices are created and what the composition of spaces would ultimately be in that office. As we look to justify, like, why are we even going back in? Well, there are a lot of factors that while working from home is somewhat effective, there are a lot of things we can't do from here, and a lot of experiences that are not equal. And so this to us is going to greatly drive the future composition of office spaces.
Makes a lot of sense. And hold that thought, because we're going to explore some of those topics that you mentioned in subsequent questions. Melissa, you have anything to add for this big picture discussion on future changes?
Yeah, I would add 2 things. One is that it is giving us an opportunity to see work as an activity, not just as a place, and to kind of see how those are separated from one another. I always want to make sure that I say that we're so thankful to be white collar knowledge workers, the kind of workers that have the opportunity to do work in distributed ways, and to do work through digital platform, and have that flexibility. So I think that we need to be conscious of the sort of potential divide or some of the social complexities around work that can be done digitally and work that can't, and or be more creative about the way some of our physical work moves into digital work. And I would finally say that it's really an opportunity now for organizations to think more closely about their workplace why. Instead of taking physical workplace as a given, we have the opportunity to return to those offices with a real mission behind why we have those spaces and what their purposefulness is within the context of the organization, since we've been exposed to this striking fact that we may not necessarily need those spaces in the same way we thought we did.
Very nice. Very good. Bob?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot that's happening right now. We're in this very disruptive time. There's lots of uncertainty, and I think building on what Melissa was saying, I think we've learned how to be productive, working at home or working remotely. So I think a lot more people are going to be comfortable with that. What I think the office is going to represent now is a place that's unique to each organization, where that organization can create their own culture, create their own work process. While we can be productive at home, what we can't really do at home is innovate, and so I think that's where, people, the social interaction, the ability to exchange ideas is going to be critical. because our economy really depends more on innovation than it does on productivity. So I think that workplace is going to be refined to be a place that you go when you need to be there, you go there when you need to interact with other people, and when you don't, then I think it's fine to work in a co-working location or some other remote workplace.
Wonderful. I think all important points. And at this point, now that we kind of set the table and the landscape, we know what we're kind of looking at generally. I want to drill into some of these concepts. So I guess, first of all, can we discuss some of the short-term solutions? So how do we welcome employees back to the workplace during these kind of initial recovery stages? And I suppose, what are the quick wins and practical solutions to be considered? And Bob, would you like to maybe give us a couple points here?
Sure. Vedran, I think the way that I kind of think about it is I almost see there's three different phases to this. The first phase is, I think, try to understand your organization. It's really more about policy. It's more about behavior. It may be, scheduling people to come in at certain times. It may be distancing the workspace, so that people are safe. I think it's creating an environment that people are going to feel comfortable in. Those may be very minor physical changes. I think the second phase is going to be this, what I kind of refer to as the Band-Aid approach. It's going to be the plexiglass barriers, or the 6-foot circles on the carpets, or, those kinds of features that I think, the physical environment then begins to dictate that behavior for us, and the physical environment's beginning to protect people. But I think the third phase is really a longer term look at this, which is where, we step back, we look at the real, meaning, as Melissa was saying, the why behind the workplace, and really try to understand how that workplace can provide value, for an organization, become a place that, enhances the quality of work that people do, and energizes us, becomes a much more healthy experience long term. So, I think, those are sort of the different steps that I think people are going to go through. And that initial phase, I think it's one where, we're really acclimating. I think it's a new paradigm. I think people have to understand how to work together. We're going to have to get comfortable in this new environment. And, I hope we get back to some sense where, we don't need to wear masks and we don't need to have the hand sanitizer around, but, that stuff may be with us for a very long time. And so, how do we, work together, and how do we collaborate, in that kind of an environment?
Christina, would you like to maybe add a couple of points about short-term solutions? I believe you're muted, Christina.
It's funny because I was just talking about from a communication standpoint. But from a communication standpoint, it's really important to really create the right messaging for people coming back in. And that starts way before people enter the office. But once they do get there, whatever they do see in the office really needs to echo that. It needs to really represent that in the office. The first thing that people are going to see when they come in is probably some of this signage that tells them what to do and not do. And it's really important that whatever they do see and are told really instills confidence and safety, so that they know what they can expect when they come in, what their responsibilities are, what the responsibilities of the company are, and to show that the company really is on top of the public health recommendations and overall just prioritizing their health. So it really does still follow the key wayfinding principles that we always suggest to our clients. It should be really seamless. So even from that first communication outside of the environment, it should be still intuitive, even though there may be new signals, new ways of moving around, new ways of spacing. And we think it still can be very visually pleasing. It can be high design, and it can even be friendly. So it's important that, I think we've all experienced going to the grocery store, or, maybe taking, I don't know if anybody's taken a bus recently, but you see a lot of paper signs. They're kind of smattered all over. You might see tape on the floor. That can cause a lot of anxiety for people. It can remind them of this entire experience of the pandemic. So it's really important to think about those seemingly smaller items and put some more effort into that, because it is really important. And then also on the short term, just how do we approach circulation? That's a huge thing. If people don't feel like they can easily move around as much as allowed, they might feel trapped at their desk, and then what's the point of even coming in? So those are just some of the things we're thinking about.
Yeah, so I guess in a way, part of it is kind of instilling, I guess, supporting a COVID responsive behaviors while at the same time creating an environment that is calming and relaxing, and it's not just beating people over the heads with new regulatory information and concepts, correct?
Exactly, yeah.
Melissa, have anything to add to this discussion on short-term solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I'd first do a three-part piece, a little bit like Bob did. When we're helping our clients at this moment in time, our three aspects or our three objectives are optimize the current experience, recognizing that that's likely to be a significant work from home component for a while. Help organizations physically return to the office, and then make sure to be thoughtful and listening to all of what we've heard so far from our employees in order to think about the long-term real estate implications of what we've learned from telework and other aspects of this experience. I love Christine's comment, friendly. And I think it's an opportunity for organizations as we recognize that we need to have new signage in space, and that signage is more about human behavior and maybe more kind of directional or advisory than we might usually have. I think it's an opportunity. A lot of our work at Plastark is referencing co-working spaces, and we think co-working spaces are often really good at some of these visual communications in space because they're not just bringing in employees who come every day to the same place, but they're kind of more interacting with the general public in a workplace kind of environment. So I think it's an opportunity for organizations to think about their voice. How do they communicate these things? And you might expect that the voice of communications coming from a banking institution versus a technology company versus a creative agency, et cetera, might be quite different. So I think that interplay of that sort of language voice and that visual voice and how we're giving people guidance. I think of the New York City subway system that has these sort of like icons that are sort of like the toilet male and female logos, and those little characters are always doing good or bad things on the train, but it's very playful and a way to communicate with the public. So I think it's a real opportunity for organizations to think differently about how they communicate, aside from all the practical details of how we manage ourselves in the spaces post or mid-COVID.
No, really good points. I mean, I think it's that communication aspect is key, right? To instill confidence and safety within the users and the employees, right? Nabil, now that Bob and Melissa have given their 3-point plans, I was wondering if you had another 3-point plan to round us out.
Well, I think they've covered a lot of grounds there, but you know, I'm just trying to think of what else to add. In addition to, there's a lot of tactical steps. So everything from you know, air conditioning upgrades, floor standing filtration that, you know, is being added, entry sequence and how people come in to the space. And so there's a whole slew of, you know, tactical responses that I think are helpful to create as safe an environment as possible. There are some functions within the office that, you know, are central hubs for people and activity. Generally, it's around food and going to the bathroom. And so these are areas that I think require special consideration in many of the clients, with many of the clients that we're working with. You know, sometimes it's in the early stages, in the first 1 or 2 weeks, it's actually too hard to figure out things like a pantry. And so certain areas of that is decommissioned, and people are then, you know, kind of forced to accommodate very quickly. And I think that's very important. And it kind of brings me to the main point I want to make here, is that while we're trying our best, you know, with our own firms and even with the clients that we support to create safe environments, I think what we're seeing is successful is a very empathetic approach, and really looking at each of the employees' comfort level. It doesn't matter how much safety we provide in the office. This is unprecedented for many. And so it's really incumbent on organizations to be able to communicate almost on an individual level and have that flexibility on when that return is. For most of the companies we're working with, there's a span. It's kind of like, we've set it up, feel free to come in over the course of the next 1 or 2 months, and we're going to ramp our density up over time, and we're going to keep you in constant communication. And another thing that those same groups do is they communicate that this is all based on scenario planning, that the scenario may slightly change tomorrow and we may have to adjust again. And I think that change readiness is really critical at this moment, because there's flip-flop messaging, and as things go up and down, we may have to make adjustments along the way. And I think that all of that, if it's not done properly, creates a lot of distress and lack of clarity, I suppose, for people. So tactical solutions, technical solutions are all there. We can go through the list, but really the critical things that we're seeing is kind of the more human side of this, and that requires a lot of one-on-one collaboration and understanding of people.
And Melissa, I think you had your hand up there for a quick second.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to kind of wrap up that conversation topic, because I think it had a number of points about change and communication and the employee-employer relationship. When we do research into topics around compliance, like for banking institutions, et cetera, one of the things that we find is that there's more efficacy in a certain set of outcomes through the choice of behavior, that cultural change training, than through the physical space, right? It's literally that concept of you have a lock on something just to show that it shouldn't be accessed, not because it's not possible to break that lock if you need it. And so I think this is a really important fact in relation to the COVID moment, because people's own choice and behavior when they come into the office and how they choose to respect others by wearing a mask, by being safe, by behaving in a certain set of ways, that behavior is actually going to have greater efficacy for avoiding transmission of the disease than almost any intervention, probably aside from HVAC, that we could do from an architectural and engineering perspective. So I think it's just really important to highlight that and to see this as a combination of physical space and people behavior.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, right? And now on to our next question. We discussed a little bit about this notion of flexibility, and one of the ways we're seeing flexibility is where we choose to work, in the sense that a lot of us are lucky enough to be able to work from home. So I'm just wondering, considering this dramatic shift towards working from home, how do we strengthen employee connections to the physical workplace and office? And what has working from home taught us about the office and the importance of the physical workplace? And Melissa, would you like to lead us off with this question?
Yes, certainly. So I already mentioned the workplace why. I think that's number one. And this shift to telework can't be unseen. I think it's really important to recognize that, and also how that can't be unseen by certain groups of people. Maybe folks who are more traditional and didn't think that we would be successful in telework, maybe by millennials and some of the younger workforce who maybe had not had a chance to work in a telework capacity before because of their level within the organization or the sense that they need to be trained, et cetera. So I think it's really important to look at who is impacted and what is it that we're seeing in this thing that we can't unsee. The three things that I think are most powerful about this telework change are the opportunities as they relate to sustainability. Buildings, the way we move between buildings combined are the largest energy consumption that there is, and the planet has had a chance to breathe in the last few months in ways that it hadn't before, and I think that's really important to incorporate. There's totally different options in terms of work-life balance. I think the idea that people went into an office or into a factory was a very mid 20th century viewpoint, and we'd gone into knowledge work and office work, and we've continued to have this mid 20th century viewpoint of how work gets done and where work gets done. And that was becoming increasingly unsustainable from a human perspective. Anything over 15 minutes of commute time has a negative impact on your personal experience and your lifestyle. And there's tons of research to show that the kinds of commute times that we have of 45 minutes, a couple of hours a day, are not sustainable for families or individuals or anyone else. So I think we're really pushed towards a rethink of that. And finally, inclusivity. I think it's important to recognize that space is in many ways exclusive, either because you have to commute to a certain place. Even with ADA, a lot of our buildings are still very inaccessible to people with a variety of abilities. And whether it's hearing impaired or seeing impaired, there's so many things that can be solved when we're working together through technology as opposed to working together through physical space. And to your point about how we glue together employees and employers at this moment in time, I think the glue is going to be in how companies respond to and embrace the opportunity to rethink these things and the way that they build rapport and community with their employees through their own responses to this, and then of course also to the race and class topics that are charged in our nation at this point in time as well.
A lot of really interesting points there. Christina, I think you had a point you wanted to add.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Melissa that this is a huge opportunity. We have this wealth of information that we've never had, especially to this scale before, about people working in this new environment, which is their home. And we should be really tapping into this. And we already have seen the studies that have shown, a lot of people will ask their employees, are you excited to come back? What are your feelings about coming back? And we've heard that many are excited, or many would favor coming back for certain portions of the week. But that doesn't mean that they aren't anxious, and it doesn't mean that when they do get back, there might still be some difficulties there. And I also think another thing we're hearing a lot is that when asked what are the things about coming back, and I think Nabil's mentioned this too, when asked about what are those aspects of being in the workplace that draw you in, it is the social aspect, and it is the collaboration, and as Bob said, it's really the innovation that happens in the workplace. So if this is what we're finding out, I think we would be doing everyone a huge disservice if we bring people back into these workplaces that a lot of them could be the same company working in different places. They aren't personalized or anything like that. So I think, we need to create the setting. And as Melissa said, it's an opportunity to engage employees in this and really do a big discovery and have them, where possible, even help create that future workplace for themselves. I think it's an exciting time, honestly.
So I wonder, in that sense, what are some of the limitations of working remotely, and how does the physical office not face these same limitations? Like, what is it about the physical space that allows us to be not just more productive, but perform better?
I'll be happy to jump in on that one. I think if you think about, somebody's workplace, when somebody walks in there, whether they realize it or not, they're communicating a message. You're absorbing, all this information, about what's in that space, and so I think it's really important for organizations to consider what that experience is like. What's that message that they want to convey to people? How do they communicate it? What are the values that they use to communicate that? And so I think that space is, super important, in terms of setting that framework, building the culture, what the expectations are, even about what the sort of purpose of the organization is, what the strategic goals are. That space is a tool that people have to be able to align, their organization. And I think if you think about and ask yourself, what is the fundamental purpose of office space? You might be tempted to answer, it's to house my operation, but I think it goes beyond that to where, it's a tool that leaders have to, direct their people, shape their people, achieve their strategic goals. I mean, the fundamental purpose of that office space, in my mind, is solely to achieve the strategic goals of that organization. And if the space isn't performing that, and it has to perform it on a variety of different levels. So, from attracting the right talent to, organizing and aligning, all the work and the process, and the organization that needs to take place, to communicating, what is that strategic goal, or what are the values of that organization and the expectation of how people engage. That space is a very powerful tool that organizations have to be able to lever themselves to achieve their strategic goals. And so the bottom line in my mind is that, this is a leadership tool, and we've been sort of forced into rethinking a lot of these things. So even something as, standard as an office building, now we're a lot of those office buildings are empty. So it's coming back and it's forcing us to ask the question, what is the purpose of that office building? How does it really serve, our organizations? Where is it providing value? And so I think, we're going to be faced with a lot of new questions, coming out of this that, a lot of people I don't think have really had to think about before.
Yeah, I think that's an important point about the strategic value of the office space, right? And Nabil, I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit in a sense of kind of balancing the strategic value of the office while with, the desire for employees to have the ability to work from home and work remotely. How do you balance those two aspects of the work experience?
Yeah, so I guess to answer that question, what this whole experience I think has done is it's really shed light on what part of our work is an individual line of action, and what part of it is collective. And it's also shed light on how effectively we could do either of those things in different settings. And so what we are seeing already, and even pre-COVID, we've been designing spaces for distributed workforces. Companies who have chosen to have a distributed workforce and not have everyone within 20 miles of a single location. And so a lot of those learnings are actually transferable into this new day, this new state. And to Bob's point, these buildings are empty. A lot of office buildings are empty, but as things loosen up and as we get over the coronavirus specifically, there is a high chance that we're gonna wanna go back into the office, and we're gonna also wanna work from home. And these two realities need to coexist together. And so what we're seeing is that it's a more conscious decision going back into the office. It's either to escape our homes. Maybe we need focus. It's not everyone who has, a setting where they can sit down and focus at home. Many of us are also taking care of our children. Right now I have a lawnmower for some reason in my neighbor's yard during a webinar. But all of these things happen. And so sometimes we need to even focus, and a workplace could provide that. But we're also seeing that a workplace isn't just about that. So a survey that we had run, a global survey that we had run just recently, we were able to see a very immediate shift. And this is a projection. So previously, where on average, it was a 30% collaboration and amenity versus a 70% focus work kind of composition. The projected, future for those like companies was closer to a 70%, 65 to 70% of collaboration versus a 30% focus. And so there's just a massive shift, or projected massive shift, in how that space is composed, and where we would be able to provide, an attractive tool to bring people in, to do the type of collaboration necessary to come up with new ideas, or multidisciplinary team meetings, or even giving feedback on new ideas is done much easier in person than if we're doing it behind a screen. There are unspoken nuances to the way we communicate that are really, really important to do together in a room together. So we're seeing that as being really the main driver, the future workplace being function rich, almost designed like you would do a distributed workforce. And this isn't to say that every person is going to work from home all the time. Some people are still going to want to come into the office. It's just that the proportion is changing. And because the proportion has changed so much, it is now really clear that something can be done and a strategy could be set to capitalize on that shift in the proportion. of people from working from home and working from the office. So we're very much seeing this as becoming a reality. Technology is going to play an incredible role. One of the things that we're working on with many clients is having remote ready solutions. So when you're in the office, you're almost geared up the way you would be if you unplugged and went back home and set up. So everything from the screen experience, to the computer experience, to even the height of the desk and chair experience, all of that experience being almost mapped so that when you do work from home, it is very similar to what you do at work in the office. And just trying to create as many parallels and connections between those as possible. It's really supporting that more fluid transfer between inside the office and outside of the office.
Yeah, this concept of seamless experience, right? Where you can work wherever works for you in that particular instance in time, seamlessly and effectively, correct?
Right, and maybe I'll just hog the floor for like another minute.
But you're getting to our next point, which is the big picture solutions and where we see the future of work going. So keep going, Nabil. You're hitting that.
You got me revved up now, so I gotta go. So,
go, please.
So the thing that that is really evident now, and this is interesting as well, is when we're looking at working from home and working from the office, sometimes we apply regional context as almost a broad brush. We say, okay, well, those who live in environments that are less dense, in countries that are less dense, possibly have homes that are less dense and possibly have the ability to work from home in an easier manner. And so, we sometimes think that these are truths, but we've been working now with several, companies all around the world, and we're seeing, okay, well, for example, a very dense nation where it's a multi-generational home setting, you have auntie, uncle, mom, dad, kids, all in a house, and you would imagine it's very difficult to work from home in those settings. You may even have limited broadband access. And so we almost say, okay, well, that's that region's issue, right? And that's kind of their reality, and that's not the reality we would experience, for example, in Canada or in the US or something like that. But interestingly enough, one of our clients specifically, when they had opened a portion of their office, this is a Canadian client, when they opened a small portion of their office for people to come back, almost double the amount of space that was allocated was requested. So people just started flooding and saying, we want to come back to the office. Yeah. And it was shocking because all of a sudden, they expected people to have, their staff to have fear. But actually what they realized is that group of people that were coming were actually young people. And there were young people in Canada, and you would not expect that these two realities to be similar. But actually they were living in, 4 or 5 people per house, many roommates. They had a difficulty with access to broadband. Their reality was almost very, very similar to the reality of someone on the other side of the world. And that's where we're, using the ideas of developing personas, the idea of, being able to define different personas within an organization and using that as a design brief for the creation of spaces moving forward. So just thought I'd share that a little.
Nabil, I think that's really interesting because, in some ways, if you look at the workplace now, you were talking about the technology, and that's really changed very dramatically. I mean, 20 years ago, if this had happened, so many more businesses would be just out of business. They couldn't function. And I think we're going to see another shift here is that if you look at businesses that are able to perform, it's going to be those businesses that have, the more advanced technology, the better tools. And I'm starting to see these workplaces where it's almost like, you need the microphone, you need the speakers, you need the camera, you need the lighting, you need the background, to be able to communicate effectively, in this environment. And so, I think that, you're going to see that happening, not only in the home environment, and that's going to separate, sort of the haves from the have-nots, but you're also going to see that in the work environment where we're going to need to create those spaces that have, all of those technical tools so that, we can, more effectively communicate, those ideas across a larger number of people. So I think we're in this really interesting period, and I think the paradigm is going to change. It's very disruptive, and I think what we come out of it is going to, we're going to be thinking very differently about the way that we work.
I want to just quickly jump in there. I think maybe one of the things that we're not acknowledging enough is how much of a hierarchy is built into our work environments. If you think about who has offices or who doesn't have offices, if you think about even the relationship between chairs within a meeting room, or what kind of visual symbols there are of who's in charge and who's the boss and what is the cultural norm, I think there's a lot more of that, and maybe it's not all positive in terms of what are those symbols and messages of the environment. And I think we're seeing that you know, I'm hearing people say they're having more intimate conversations, they're feeling more connected through Zoom and other video chat channels. That part of that connectivity is that we're actually being taken out of those designed to tell you your place in the world configurations, and we have an opportunity maybe to work outside of the boundaries of that expectation. And so I'm really hoping that there's ways that as designers we can help bring back into the work environment some of those things that have maybe been learned from the virtual work environment, about what could be better about how we treat each other, how we flatten our organizations, how we make our organizations open to all of the different perspectives and channels of communication.
Yeah, really interesting about creating, I guess, an egalitarian workplace and transitioning those concepts from remote work into the physical space.
Yeah,
really
you know,
good point.
Melissa, I mean, I think that's an interesting way to look at it. I think my fear is what I see happening is, you know, it's almost like we're going back to the mid 80s where we're going to see higher panels, plastic separation, this, workstation that encloses and separates people, but it's not going to be effective in terms of protecting or keeping people safe. And so I think we have to be careful.
Yeah, I think designers need to get on top of that, and quickly, because the physical space that you see as an occupant in the office is not the environment from an air circulation perspective, right? You could be in an office that looks like it has 4 walls, but there's a ventilation system that connects it to the adjacent office, and you are literally breathing the air out of the person sitting beside you in an enclosed office. And then you could have a negative pressure, open work area, well ventilated at a distance, and have good behavior in that setting and actually be safer. So I think it is an incredibly important moment in time. We've spent so much time talking about acoustics and daylighting in the office. Those have been kind of the big themes of recent years. The secrets of daylighting, the secrets of acoustics, and now is the time, the golden moment for HVAC, mechanical engineering, understanding air circulation, because what you see on the floor plan is not what will be experienced from a ventilation perspective. And I think the research shows more and more every day that the transfer of germs is less about touchable surfaces and much more about the contaminants in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Good points. And just very quickly before we move on to our audience questions, I just want to address one thing that was mentioned by a couple of the panelists, which is this connection between the physical office and company brand and culture, and in ways that we can use COVID to design spaces which more accurately and honestly communicate brand culture and values. And Christina, I was wondering if you could say a few things about that before we move on to the audience questions.
Yeah, I think definitely it's a huge opportunity, and we see many companies doing it, but I think what was maybe a nice to have for some companies is now becoming a must have. In terms of how we carry that out, a lot of the work we do is in graphics, photography, color, things like that, to really express who the people are that work in the company, what the values are, the clients and purpose they serve. It's all really important. As Bob was saying earlier, the built environment in the workplace is a huge tool to express what that company does and believes in, and to really have the people in that environment understand it, employees and clients alike. Of course, when clients are allowed back into our offices, but it's a huge thing. And I think when we asked the earlier question, well, what is the advantage of coming back in? That's really it. And also from Melissa was touching on many elements that are spoken about with the well building standard, which has gained a lot of traction in the last few years. I think that is going to be a huge part of this whole brand culture as well, because our mental health and wellness is so tied to how we experience the company we're working for. It's tied to the type of work we do and the effectiveness of work we do. So it's interesting when we think about acoustics and airflow and things, there's also a big part of the WELL standard that does focus on the visual elements of the environment. Things like patterns, color, the ways that that environment really expresses even biophilic elements, which you can do with graphics as well. And even things like behavioral nudging. How do you encourage people to use the stairs? Maybe you have huge pieces of artwork, or to eat healthier. All these things can actually be in some ways structured through that visual environment. So I really think it's a lot of what us as designers and architects have been preaching for many years, I think is just really going to gain a lot more importance. And I think people will see that, as some of the other panelists have said, we need to appeal people back into these spaces.
Yeah, so the strategic value of the office in communicating brand values becomes that much more important.
Yeah, and I think not only brand values, but really their commitment to their employees' happiness and health, really.
Yeah, fair enough.
We haven't talked a lot about just the whole mental aspect, but I think that's a whole other thing that's going to emerge, out of this experience, is that, how we react emotionally, physically, mentally, in some of these environments, I think is going to become a much more prominent topic that we dive into.
Yeah, so there'll be, I suppose, a shift in the workplace to consider employee health and well-being as a whole, correct?
Oh, very much so, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they're going to be, I totally agree, Bob, but I think they're going to be more responsible for it than ever before. And there's going to be a way bigger expectation, and it's going to be part of how people decide where to work. I think it's definitely emerging.
Okay, and on that note, I think we're going to move on to our audience questions. We have a bunch of questions coming in and we don't have much time left. So let's see how many we can get through. The first question asks, how do you envision all the excess office space being repurposed? It's pretty clear a lot of companies are considering work from home as a permanent part of their culture.
What,
I think the jury's still out, but answer, Bob.
No, I was going to say, look, I think that what's going to happen, you're going to see people that are working from home, they're comfortable there, and they're going to say, hey, I don't need to go into the office. I think you're going to have other people that say, hey, I'm tired of working at home. I want to go into the office. I need to meet with people. I need to interact with people. I think from the organizational perspective, that space is going to become much more valuable in terms of helping to direct and shape that organization and to derive, the strategic goals, help them to innovate. So, where, Melissa was talking about the Tayloristic, aspects, the mechanistic aspects of office space, historically, I think all of that is going to change. I think what we're going to see is the space becomes, much more energetic, creative, very fungible space that, it's all about ideas. It's all about innovation. And that's why you're going to go into the office. So that's going to be, I think, how I see the purpose of this office space changing.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think, we may not pack and stack the way we used to.
Mm.
So I think the densities were definitely moving, they're getting tighter and tighter. And so I think we've taken a break from that for a moment, and we're probably going to come back and look at that with a new lens. And so that's going to probably shift the way that we allocate space per person. And then I think flexibility, the need to have space that is adaptable. So that's going to be a huge criteria, because the adaptability basically equals resiliency. So for the space to be resilient, it has to take on different shapes and forms depending on different threat levels. Today, it's this COVID-19. I'm sure from here on moving out, this is going to be a design brief in many RFPs to come, that future spaces need to have some consideration of airflow, the ability to be kind of de-densified or reduced in density, the ability to increase density. What does that mean for infrastructure and cable points and power cords and all that kind of stuff? So there's a lot of things to consider. And I don't think we've experienced 12 weeks of working away from the office. It's not like we've done this for years and years. Companies that have done this for years and years, like distributed workforce companies, have come back and built centers, hubs, because for mentorship, for attraction, for aspects of their innovation, they still need that physical space to bring people together. So there's a lot to learn from them.
You know, Nabil, you raise an interesting question there, talking about efficiency of space and square footage per person. You know, I think if you think about that, that metric is completely out the window now. It doesn't hold water, you know, anymore. And I think that was derived from looking at space as an asset. You know, it was compared, you know, like a real estate deal, you know, and now, you know, the real estate deal doesn't hold value, you know, anymore, unless, you know, you can extract value out of that environment. And so I think, you know, each organization is going to have to come up with their own metric about how they're deriving that value, you know, but if we look at space, you know, as a square footage per person or as an efficiency measure, to me, that defeats the whole sort of rethinking purpose. You know, it's going back into that Tayloristic mechanistic approach. You know, now what we need to think about is, you know, where's the strategic value? Where's the value? How are people really enjoying it? Where's the quality of life? You know, how do we improve, you know, people's health and energize them, you know, in these environments? So we need a new metric for that, which I don't think exists yet.
Yeah, and when I hear about these changes you're both speaking about, I just immediately think about the wayfinding experience with that. So if you, let's say, have people that aren't coming in every day, or you have different people coming at different times, maybe there'll be spaces that are used by multiple companies. Like, there's so many possibilities. And when I think now of spaces, you go to your office, you kind of forget how you got there, you know it so well, but that might not be the case as much. There might be, if places, is, for example, Nabil was talking, if places are more adaptable, more flexible and changing, you might need to have signage that can really respond to that quickly, that is adaptable as well, or you might need to have more information from the entrance, especially these huge office buildings, to really direct people that may not be as familiar with the space as they traditionally were in the past.
I think I heard in that question, you know, a question about how do we use this excess space. I first mentioned that the jury's still out. I'm not sure if we're going to see excess space, but I think it's really an opportunity to look closely at mixed use versus solo use. One of the great things about cities is that because of how they're structured and organized, kind of their historic nature, they tend to be inherently mixed use. You have retail and food and beverage on the ground level. You've got maybe a mix of housing and office above it, and that rich fabric multi-modal experience is I think a better experience for people, and it's challenging from a development perspective when we have a massive office park and your homes are dozens of miles away, hundreds of miles away, and vice versa. So I think that hopefully one of the things, if there is a kind of rethink of space holistically as a result of this, or through the market and the economics that follow this, is that maybe we'll get more diverse use of space and more mixed use environments. I completely agree with Christina's points about spaces that might be more navigatable, that those might be more navigatable by digital communications. You know, your phone is vibrating because you're at the destination, or to tell you turn left or turn right. And I think, again, co-working offers an opportunity for office space to move closer to employees and to be part of that portfolio or mix. It's not just go into the office or not go into the office, and maybe that's at quite some distance from your home or your childcare or anything else, but that co-working offers a spatial solution to that total kind of day in the life proposition.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left, so to move on to the next question. So we spent a bit of time talking about the importance and need for collaboration within the workspace. So this question is generally about us collaborating as designers and design professionals and strategists. So the question is, what's the value in all the design disciplines collaborating to a greater extent, and how do we do that? Who takes the lead, clients and design, or designers? So collaboration amongst us as design and strategy professionals.
I mean, I almost think it's got to be both working together and collaborating together. I mean, I can't design a space if I haven't had a conversation with my client, and I don't think that, a designer can just design a space in a vacuum. So, I mean, I think it's both working together.
Mhm.
I heard the question more as, does the designer or the client initiate integrated design among different disciplines of design? And I would say that I think the client does play a significant role in that, in terms of how RFPs are written, how teams are built, how the economics of any project assembles, how it's determined, will there be pay for these services, but not these services, et cetera. So I think in many ways, the client establishes the business environment in which all of the other team members will be able to operate. There may be like the agar in the petri dish that kind of sets the hospitable environment for unique and collaborative ways of working. So as designers, we definitely need to do it, but we certainly need the support of our clients to bring that that integrated perspective to the table.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I may have misheard that, but Melissa, I think you're right. I mean, the client's going to set the priorities, in that situation. And then I think, we're dealing in an environment that is getting increasingly complex. And so there's more and more, experts that are coming in. And if you look at the number of consultants that are involved on some of these projects today, that number keeps growing. And so where they fit into the process and how they fit into the process is becoming, critical. Otherwise, we miss out on the opportunities to improve that space. But I think that's, the client has to set the priorities, and then the designer needs to almost conduct the orchestra, in the right way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we can find ways to bring consultants in where possible. But I totally agree with you both. And I think as we chart these uncharted territories, are really bringing the need to always engage people who are at the top of their research in their particular area of expertise. We can't use this one size fits all approach anymore. And so it's really important that we're all bringing that to the table.
And I think on that note, we're actually going to wrap it up. We're getting close to the end of our time. We only have a minute left. Thank you, panelists, for joining us for what was a very engaging and thoughtful discussion. I really do appreciate it. And for those of you that submitted questions, apologies if we were unable to get to your questions. We will try to get to them in some future thought leadership items, which we will be developing. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and have a good rest of the afternoon. Oh, Melissa, yes, one quick question or comment?
Yeah, actually, if you captured those questions, I'd be happy to answer them offline, and then we could use that as a follow-up for some of the people who didn't get their questions answered.
Perfect, sounds good to me.
Yeah. Vedran, thanks. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks, everyone.
Nabil,
Thank you, Andrew.